Hello and welcome back to the channel. On today's tutorial, I'll be sharing with you how I made this Victorian corset with square yoke neckline. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for supporting my channel. So here are my patterns, and I have placed it to cut on the main fabric, and as you can see, I added ½ inch round. Then going over to the side, I added ½ inch, and I didn't add by the side because I've already added it when I was drafting out. So to my yoke, I cut out 2 pieces, and I went ahead to add joining allowance because I'll be joining it to the fabric part, and I added ½ inch at the lower and at the upper parts also. So next, we're going to be joining this particular fabric together. So to join my fabric, I went ahead to unpin my pattern. So I'm going to take the first pattern, and which is in 2 pieces, and I'm going to join it with after joining it inch. I'm going to join the second piece of this fabric. So I'm just going to open it up this way, and I'll go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to go ahead to stitch it with ½ inch at both sides. So after stitching it, this is what I have, and I'm going to go ahead to stitch the first side pattern. I'm going to open it up this way, and I'm going to place it, and then I'll go ahead to stitch with ½ inch at both sides of the pattern also. So after stitching the side, this is what I have. This is what your pattern is looking already, and we're going to go ahead to stitch the last part of this particular pattern together. So I'm going to bring the side, and I'm going to place it, and I'm going to join with ½ inch. So after stitching the patterns, this is what I have. This is what it's looking like. So the next step I'm going to do right now is to sew down my allowance at the back to create. So while stitching my allowance, I'm not going to stitch the center. I'm just going to leave it that way, but you can go ahead to stitch yours. So what I'm going to do right now is to go ahead, and I will stitch down my allowance, and I'm going to create a boning channel at the back of the dress because I'll be inserting boning to this dress. So after stitching down the allowance, this is what I have. So while joining your fabric, you can go ahead to iron stay to your fabric. So just the same way I joined my main fabric, I'm going to go ahead to iron my lining to iron my gum stay to my lining, and I'm going to join it. So after joining my lining, this is what I have with my main fabric. So you can add your ready-made cup or wording if you so please. So going over, this is my neck piece, and the next step we're going to take is to join the neck piece. So to join your neck piece, you're just going to unpin this part. So I'm going to open my pattern, and this is the part for the yoke, and I'm going to go ahead to place it together, and I'm going to stitch at the neck line, and I'm going to stitch by the side to hold it down. So after stitching, this is what I have, and I went ahead to iron it, and I trimmed down the neckline a bit. So after doing this, what you're going to do right now is to add the other parts of the neckline. So to do that, you're just going to place this way, and you're going to sew with ½ inch, and you're going to place your lining with it, and you're going to go ahead to stitch it with ½ inch, and you're going to do this for both sides of the dress. After doing that, this is what I have. So what I'm going to do right now is to join the yoke area to the main fabric. So I'm just going to fold this into 2, and I'm going to notch. So remember, we have a joining at the center of the dress, and I'll be using that as the center. So the notched part will be placed on the center of the dress. So I'm going to go ahead to flip it this way, and I'm going to top stitch with ½ inch on the sewing machine. So after joining it, this is what I have. Next, you're going to attach your lining to the dress, and you're going to place it this way, the middle touching the middle of the main fabric, and you go ahead to stitch with ½ inch at the upper part. After stitching down, You're going to fold what you have inwards, and you're going to go ahead to stitch the side of your dress. So after stitching the side of my dress, this is what I have, and this is what is looking like. So I'll be inserting boning to this dress later, but before that we'll move over to sewing the back pattern. This is my back pattern, and this is what I have. So first thing, I'm just going to join the first part. So this is the first part. What you're going to do is to pick the first part of your pattern, and you're going to stitch it with 1/2 inch. But before I go ahead to stitch it down, I'm just going to open it up this way just to show you. So you're going to place it this way. So you're going to pick the third piece and you're going to add it to the other side. So with this now, what you're going to do right now is to go ahead and join it with 1/2 inch at the sewing machine. So after joining it, this is what I have. I went ahead to join my lining also. I ironed my gum stay to my lining and I went ahead to join it. So going over to the back, I'm just going to open it this way, and I'm going to take my lining piece and I'm going to place it on it for the both sides. So I'll go ahead to sew the neckline and the side facing inwards. So I'm going to leave the down part and the side because I'll be attaching sleeve and I'll be attaching it to the lower part of the dress. I'll repeat the same method for the other side, and I'll go ahead to create a loop for my button at the back. So after doing that, I also go ahead to stitch down my joining allowance to create a boning channel for the back. So after stitching down, this is what I have, and I went ahead to sew my back. So what I'm going to do is to notch and flip it to the right side. So I've gone ahead to do that, and this is what I have at the back. And I went ahead to also make little loops for the lacing bar at the back. So I just got out 1 inch material and I went ahead to fold it to create loops. So what I'll do right now is to measure about 1/2 inch from the open part of my material, and I'm going to place the upper part this way, and I'm going to go ahead to stitch it with 1/2 inch. So after stitching it with 1/2 inch, this is what I have. I measured 1/2 inch away because I'm going to be using that 1/2 inch to turn it up. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is to place my loop to create my lacing bar. So I'm just going to fold it into 2 and I'm going to sew there. So by the time you place it on that 1/2 inch this way and you sew and turn to the other side, is going to go in. So what you're going to do right now, I'm going to go ahead to mark 1 inch interval. After marking this 1 inch interval, that's the place that I will be placing my loop. So I'll keep placing my loop on that 1 inch interval that I marked, and I will go ahead to sew it down. I'm going ahead to sew down my loop. The next thing is to use my lining to turn it, and to do that I'm just going to flip this yoke part inside and I'm going to place my lining. I'll go ahead to stitch the sides and stitch the neckline and down to that part, and I'm going to turn it open to the other side. So after stitching it, this is what I have, and the next thing I'll do is to go ahead to sew 1/2 inch because I'll be inserting boning at that part to hold the loop to give it strength at this part. So I'm done sewing the both sides, and this is what I have. So right now is to join the neckline of the dress. So to join the neckline, you're going to place it together this way, and you're going to take the lining of the back and you're going to flip it this way, and you're going to go ahead to stitch with 1/2 inch. So when joining your shoulder, you can go ahead to add a shoulder pad to give your shoulder a lift, just like the thumb. So after joining my shoulder, this is what I have. So I cut out my sleeve. Sorry, I did this offline because of space in my phone. So what I'm going to do right now is to attach the sleeve to the dress. So for my sleeve, I'm not using lining. You can go ahead to use lining for yours. So what I'm going to do right now is to go ahead to attach this to my dress. I will notch the center of the sleeve and I'm going to open it up this way and place it. So that notch part will be at the joining at the shoulder, and I'm going to sew with 1/2 inch at both sides. After joining the shoulder, we'll be moving over to shape the dress. So I'm just going to flip it to the wrong side of the material. So this is what I have, and I'm going to pin the sides. But before I do that, I'm going to show you an illustration of how to join your dress or stitch it together. So this is my under bust point. It's going to be obvious when you're sewing. So from that point, I'm just going to mark it down, and the last part is my waistline. So remember, we added 1 inch allowance while sewing. So after turning up, we are left with ½ inch. So what I'm going to do next is that I'm going to measure ½ inch at both sides, and I'm going to place my tape and make sure I have 14 inches. My waist circumference is 28 divided by 2. I have 14 inches. So I'll go ahead to mark at that 14 inches. So after doing this, I'm going to go over to the under bust part of my dress. So I added 1 inch for sewing allowance. So after turning up, I have ½ inch, and I'm going to mark it at that ½ inch. So going over to the bust area of my dress, I'm going to place my tape this way at my under bust, and I'm going to mark my bust point. So at that point, what I'm going to do is to insert my bust circumference. So I'm just going to mark my bust circumference divided by 2, and that is what I will insert at this point. So I'll go over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to stitch and sew up the sleeve. So after sewing my dress, this is what I have. So the next step you're going to take right now is to insert your boning to the dress. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure that what I have in front at my waistline is 14 inches. So I will go ahead to measure that. And also make sure what I have at the back side is equal to the other side also. So I'll be moving over to sew my skirt, and I'll go ahead to unpin my skirt pattern. So I'm going to open my skirt, and I'll place my lining on it this way. Remember, we minused 2½ inches from the lining to give it a turn-up effect. So what I'm going to do is to push my lining to the end, and I'm going to go ahead to stitch with ½ inch at the lower part. So after stitching with ½ inch at the lower part, this is what I have, and I'm going to go ahead to pull my main fabric upwards this way. After pulling it, so I'm going to measure 1½ inch after that ½ inch sewing allowance that I sewed. So remember that I added 2 inches allowance for folding or turn up allowance. So by the time I sew the 1.5 inch plus ½ inch I have already, I'm going to have 2 inches. So what I'm going to do is also repeat the same process by the sides, and I'm going to pin it. So I'll go ahead to sew the sides with ½ inch after I'm done pinning this. So whatever I do to this part, I'm also going to repeat it to the back part of this skirt. After I'm done sewing the front, this is what I have, and I went ahead to sew the back also. So at the upper part of the skirt, I folded it in a bit, and I went ahead to top stitch it to give it a neat finishing. So what you're going to do now is to join your skirt. So for this particular dress, I'm joining my skirt and my top differently, and I'll go ahead to join it back together later. Just going to place my skirt, and the next thing I'm going to do is to insert my measurements. So I'm going to place my tape and measure 7 inches for my hip point. So after measuring that, I'm going to go ahead to place my tape at the upper part, and I'm going to insert my waist circumference at this point. So you're going to mark your waist circumference divided by 2, and whatever allowance you have, you're going to share it at both sides. So going to my hip also, I'm going to insert my hip circumference. So you're also going to divide your hip circumference into 2, and you're going to share the allowance you have. So after doing that, what you're going to do is you can go ahead to take what you have at the hip and slant it down if you want your skirt to be free, or you can go ahead to measure 1.5 inch or 2 inches at the lower part and connect if you want your skirt to be fitted. So after I'm done connecting at both sides, I'll go ahead to sew my skirt at the sewing machine. Make sure you blend in the sharp edge of your skirt to avoid having ear on your skirt. So after sewing it, this is what I have. So I did not attach zipper to this dress, so I'll be doing it later. So I'll go ahead to attach the upper part to the lower part. So before I do that, I'll be inserting my boning for this dress. So for my boning going to the bust side, I'm going to stop at my under bust, and I'll also repeat the same method at the other side of the bust and also at the center. So I won't let the boning pass the under bust at this part. So at the other part, I'm going to place my boning and I'm going to let it reach the end of my pattern. So I'll go ahead to insert boning at the side and at the back, especially at the loop side. You're going to insert boning to give that part strength, to give your lacing bar strength. After I'm done inserting boning to my dress, what I'm going to do is to go ahead to hold it down at this point, and I'm going to finish it with a bias tape. So I'm done sewing my bias on it. This is what the lower part looks like. I folded it in with a bias to give it a clean and finished look. So at this point right now, what I'm going to do is to attach my skirt to this particular dress. So to do that, I'm going to bring my skirt and I'll make sure the waistline of my skirt and the waistline of the upper part is matching. I'm going to place the waistline to the waistline of the upper part, and I'll go ahead to pin it with 1/2 inch. So I'll go ahead to pin it with 1/2 inch, just like I said. So after doing that, I'm just going to sew with 1/2 inch round. So after stitching it down, I'm going to show you my final look. So with this, we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button if you haven't yet subscribed. Give this video a thumbs up, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you, and see you in the next video.